Welcome everyone. I'm Shane Stansbury. I'm a senior fellow here at the law school. Our panel that we've assembled today is going to focus on ransomware and cryptocurrency, which I'm really excited about. We've got a fantastic panel. I know the news is moving fast these days. Everybody is thinking about the Ukraine. We just looks like we now have a Supreme Court nominee. So hopefully we will keep your attention. I think we've got a lot to talk about that you're going to be interested in. And I can't think of a better group to talk about it with. So let me just do some quick introductions before we dive in. I should also mention that there's on the agenda for the Lens conference, there is an email address. And you can type questions into that address, and I'll do my best to monitor those as we go along and try to fit in some of those questions. And I know some of the students might have some questions as well. First, we've got Ari Redbord, who is the head of legal and government affairs at TRM Labs. Ari has worn a number of hats in his career. At TRM, he is helping clients deal with anti-money laundering and other compliance programs for cryptocurrency and digital assets. He brings a wealth of experience from government. He served at Treasury as senior advisor to the Deputy Secretary and the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. Prior to that, he spent, I think, close to a dozen years in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. And he had a storied career there working on cases ranging from terrorist financing and export control to human trafficking and child exploitation. So great to have you with us, Ari.
Shane, you missed the most important part of my bio, though. I am a very proud 1997 Duke grad and really excited to be back today. I'm a little disappointed. I thought we were going to talk basketball today.
I'm sorry I lured you into a conversation about cryptocurrency.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited and really proud, as Lee knows, of the work that you guys are doing down at the Duke Law School on these topics around technology and national security. So really excited to join you guys.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for mentioning that you are a Duke grad. That is your most important credential. And if we get some time towards the end, I will see if we have any questions in the queue about basketball, and if so, I'll throw them your way.
Love it.
Jessica Nye is also with us. Jessica is the current supervisor of the FBI Cyber Squad in Raleigh. Jessica has been with the FBI for a number of years. She spent much of her career working in the Baltimore field office on their cyber squad, and also spent some time at the FBI Cyber Division headquarters in Washington, D.C. So she brings a ton of experience also from the government side, but is a master of investigating crimes relating to ransomware and cryptocurrency. She regularly works on computer intrusion investigations, intellectual property violations, theft of trade secrets, and so forth. So really glad you could join us, Jessica. And we will, if you want to talk basketball, we're happy to talk basketball with you as well.
Listen, I'm a Villanova grad, so we're coming for you during March Madness. So like I said, I'm happy to bring that in as well.
Great. And last but not least, we have Reiners here at Duke. He is the executive director for the Duke Global Financial Markets Center. And Professor Reiners is a veteran of the Federal Reserve. He teaches here at Duke, he teaches fintech, law and policy, and other courses relating to financial policy and regulatory practice. He writes frequently on fintech, and most recently has been writing a lot about cryptocurrency, and has been on the media circuit expressing his views on how we might think about regulating the cryptocurrency market. He also has a blog, the FinReg blog, and a podcast. I'll plug that, Lee, the FinReg pod, which you should tune into. It's really great.
And Ari was a guest on the podcast.
That's right. So it was actually a fantastic episode.
A lot of fun. Yep.
Yeah. So let's dive into it, guys. I want to keep this as dynamic as possible, but I just want to sort of set the stage, because I know that we have a number of people in the audience with different levels of background. And some are familiar with the term ransomware, some are familiar with the term cryptocurrency, some might know how those things fit together, but I just want to make sure we're sort of all speaking with the same vocabulary. And so maybe, Lee, I can start with you. Before we get to the idea of how cryptocurrency falls into all of this, can you just talk a little bit about what ransomware is? We see it in the headlines all the time, but it's actually taken on a different form than today than it has in the past. Can you just talk a little bit about what ransomware is? And then I want to turn to Jessica and Ari and get their views on sort of what ransomware looks like now as opposed to what it's looked like in the past.
Sure. So, ransomware is a form of malware that is designed to encrypt files on a user's computer or a system. And the only way to uncrypt or decrypt those files is to pay a ransom to the hacker. And that ransom is exclusively cryptocurrency. Now, ransomware does predate cryptocurrency, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So sort of early ransoms were paid in, like prepaid gift cards and debit cards, for instance. So at this point, ransomware is fueled by crypto. Of course, there's, it's hard to get accurate numbers on how prevalent ransomware is because, of course, a lot of victims, for obvious reasons, don't want to report that. And the FBI recently said that they only have information on around 20 to 25% of domestic cyber breaches. So, good numbers are hard to come by here. But I will point out that this past October, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is responsible for enforcing the Bank Secrecy Act in the U.S. and other laws related to money laundering and financial crime, came out with a report where they looked at ransomware trends in Bank Secrecy Act data. So for suspicious activity reports that were filed in just the first half of 2021, they noted that they were projected to have a higher ransomware-related transaction value than suspicious activity reports filed in the previous 10 years combined. So just to give you a sense of how prevalent and how and how much this is growing. They looked at blockchain cryptocurrency wallet addresses tied to these ransomware incidents, and they identified approximately $5.2 billion in outgoing Bitcoin transactions potentially tied to ransomware payments. Bitcoin is the principal ransom of choice for most of these attackers, although we are starting to see some growth in some other privacy coins like Monero. And then finally, I know we're going to talk about Russia and what's going on in the Ukraine, but a few weeks ago, blockchain tracking firm Chainalysis came out with a report that said 74% of global ransomware revenue, or more than $400 million worth of cryptocurrency, went to entities that are probably affiliated with Russia in some way. So, really when it comes to ransomware, all roads lead to Russia. And I know Ari and Jessica will have more to say on that.
That's a great introduction, and we're definitely going to talk about Russia very soon. Ari, I want to turn to you and just ask you to add whatever you can to what Lee has talked about, particularly in terms of why cryptocurrency has become played such an important role in the rise of ransomware. What is it about this type of currency that makes it so valuable for bad actors committing ransomware? And I know that it has good purposes too, so I want you to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, no, I love Lee because he just jumps right into it. He is not afraid to kind of lead off with sort of the most interesting, points here. But look, I think it's very nuanced, and this discussion should be nuanced, and that is the same qualities that made crypto such a force for good. It's permissionless, it's decentralized. You can engage in cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet. Which has the potential to bring banking to sort of the unbanked corners of the world. Anyone with a cell phone has access to the financial system. Folks who've been cut off potentially from the financial system for the wrong reasons, like maybe what's happening in Ukraine right now. could potentially have access to the financial system. You can send remittances faster and cheaper than ever before, across borders. But those same qualities also make it attractive to illicit actors who want to move funds at the speed of the internet across borders, in larger amounts. But I think what's really important whenever we're having this conversation is to also understand that financial crime investigators, and agents like Jessica have never had more visibility on financial flows than they do today because of the nature of the open ledger. And just to sort of back up for a moment, cryptocurrency lives and moves on an open ledger, meaning that every transaction is recorded and immutable, doesn't ever change, which allows agents, investigators, compliance professionals to use tools like TRM in order to trace and track the flow of funds. So what we've seen here is, you've seen ransomware attacks like Colonial Pipeline as an example, where investigators were able to use sophisticated blockchain intelligence tools to follow the flow of funds and ultimately seize those funds. So it's this very interesting dynamic, because Lee is absolutely right. Cyber criminals have never been able to move larger amounts of money faster than ever before. But at the same time, there's more visibility on those financial flows than ever before. When I was an assistant U.S. attorney, federal prosecutor, we would focus on bulk cash smuggling and, webs of hawalas and shell companies, prepaid debit cards, as you mentioned. Those things are hard to track. Crypto is not hard to track. However, you can move money faster and in larger amounts. And I think that's sort of some of the nuance around this conversation.
That's great. And I want to get back to the tracing mechanisms in a moment, but I want to finish the thread on ransomware in particular and what it looks like today before we get to the ins and outs of how crypto transfers work. Jessica, in 2022, as we sit here today, the methods for ransomware don't necessarily look like the ransomware methods that we saw a few years ago. And by that I mean even in even the use of cryptocurrency has changed a bit, and people see in particular this term ransomware as service thrown about. Ransomware is no longer is not that complicated to accomplish if you actually want to accomplish it. There are you can actually go out and purchase software and tools that will allow you to commit it. I'd like you to just sort of unpack that a little bit and explain to people who are not familiar with it, like what the ransomware market looks like right now. What if I'm a criminal committing ransomware, how easy is it for me to do it, and what do I need to do to go about doing it?
Yeah, so great questions. And you're unequivocally, ransomware has changed dramatically in the past few years. We used to go around a few years ago and say, go to companies and say, hey, if you have strong backups that are not connected to your network, then if you get encrypted with ransomware, you should be in a position, like I said, with robust backups that you can wipe those systems and you can restore them based upon your strong backups. And that's certainly still the case today. And we certainly still encourage strong backups. But our actors, like what we always see, they evolve and they change their methods because they realize that, a lot of companies are getting better at having these robust backups. And so with that, then now kind of the new way that they're handling this is almost like a double ransom, where that they are going to, or prior to them encrypting your networks, they're going to exfil some data out of your network. And so now you have that double ransom where that you have to be worried about, one, your systems being encrypted, but then also some of your data walking out the door. And so now you're almost kind of paying for both. And we've seen it before where that there are some companies where that are victims where they have robust backups. So they say, listen, we're not worried so much about the fact that our networks are encrypted. We're worried about the data that you just took and just kind of walked out the door with. So it's just kind of an interesting evolution into what that we've seen a few years ago to what that we see today. They're also getting more brazen, if you will, to the point where that if you're a company that's infected with ransomware and you don't contact the actors right away, we've seen certain groups that will actually call you and say, hey, why haven't you paid your ransom? And so it's just one of those, again, evolutions into how that these actors are acting, how that they're engaging with victims. And it also should change the way that, as we go out and we talk to companies in kind of the preparation stage, how that they would handle in the event of ransomware infection. The notion of what happens if all of a sudden, somebody within your front office receives a phone call from a cyber actor. What would you do? And have you talked to them about that there's a chance that something like that might happen in the event that we are, in fact, encrypted? In terms of ransomware as a service, it's a great point because, again, a few years ago, you really had to be very well tied into or at the level of actually creating it yourself. And these actors, again, have evolved. So they're at the point now where that there are many different ransomware variants, as we call, or like kind of different types of ransomware, where that they will sell you the access to then go and launch it yourself. So you no longer have to create it. You're just going to be what's called an affiliate. So you're going to be one of the many different individuals that have access to a variant, and you're going to do whatever you want to do with it. You may deploy it in a different way than somebody else who just bought it, making it a lot more difficult for us on the investigative side, where that if all of a sudden a company comes to us and they say, hey, we just got infected with this type of ransomware variant, now we have to figure out, well, this is an affiliate service. So is it this affiliate or is it this affiliate? Because the way that they came at you might be different. So the traces that they've left behind, how that we actually go about it. We may have keys for one affiliate, but not for another. And so it's really kind of changed the way that we've had to investigating it and making it more difficult oftentimes for us, but then also for the victims and trying to assist them in kind of next steps. The other piece to all of this too is the sophistication level of our ransomware actors. They're actually getting to the point where that they will be out on forums trying to find an insider. And so looking for an insider to potentially, basically pay them money to then go and encrypt a system from the inside, kind of the underbelly of a company. And so you talk about just this evolution and how things have changed, but, reaching out to a potential disgruntled employee and saying, listen, I'll pay you X amount of money if you can go ahead and you can launch this from the inside of your network. And you think about the damage at that point in time, and kind of the havoc that it could wreak on a company. It really is incredible to see how the things have changed so much in just a few years.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah.
Shane, I would just add to that, and honestly, that was probably the best explanation of ransomware and sort of the current state that I've ever heard. So, but it is this idea of sort of this, malware McDonald's, right? You're buying a franchise, and you're able to sort of, and you have this sort of support of that larger entity. I think one thing that Jessica really laid out really clearly is, this is not a crypto problem. This is a cyber problem, and the key to actually stopping this thing is to harden cyber defenses. And I think to Jessica's point, the overwhelming majority, if not all of these attacks, come from sort of what we call social engineering, where you're targeting individuals. And also, to be clear, this is not sort of what the phishing expeditions that we think of. These are incredibly targeted, sophisticated attacks on individuals, knowing a ton about their potential social media profiles, who they are, who they're connected to. We get emails from our bosses all the time, right? That says, hey, I need you to click on this Google Doc immediately and get this to me ASAP. This should have been to me yesterday. Well, that causes that sort of, anxiety in someone when they're not thinking through a decision. These are the types of sophisticated attacks are happening here. And what really has to really stop this, it's not about crypto tracing. It's not about sort of, the means of payment here. It's about hardening cyber defenses. And the reason oftentimes, cryptocurrency businesses in particular are the victims of these types of attacks from cyber actors like North Korea and, Russian cyber criminals is because they are relatively immature and sort of in their in the sort of growth of these businesses and haven't necessarily put in the sort of necessary cyber hygiene and the true cyber hardening. So I kind of just throw that out there as sort of an overarching theme here was like, yes, crypto is the means of payment, but really to stop this, we have to stop what Jessica just described. And that is this sort of these cyber attacks themselves.
I want to go back to that point in a moment, but I want to give Lee a chance to respond because Lee, I know that you've been outspoken about cryptocurrency and the fact that you actually can't solve the problem without addressing cryptocurrency. I want you to just respond to what Ari just said.
Well, I hate to disagree with my friend Ari.
That's what we're here for.
It's honestly, I found this to be one of my favorite things because it is so rare. I do a lot of these panels. It is so rare. And when Lee and I get together, it's actually like these are the important conversations to have. And I think that like one of the things I love about Duke and what's happening down there is like, this is the perfect place for these conversations to happen. And I have found it to be extraordinary to be able to have these conversations in private and in this sort of way with Lee. So yeah, it's very cool. Yeah.
Well, totally agree. And, we're an academic institution. If these type of conversations can't happen here, then where can they happen? And quick plug, we have a fantastic master's in engineering and fintech program here at Duke, run by Jimmy Lenz, and Jimmy and I are great friends. We disagree on pretty much everything when it comes to crypto, but we work hand in hand, and he's running a great program. And we have a periodic coffee and crypto chats that folks can check out on YouTube. But I do agree with Ari in the sense that organizations do need to improve their cyber hygiene. There's no doubt about it. But as he said, these ransomware attacks are conducted by sophisticated actors, in many cases, nation states or sponsored by nation states. So, we know that North Korea and their Lazarus group are funding their missile program by targeting cryptocurrency exchanges and engaging in ransomware. Russia, it might not be state sponsored, but certainly, it's not happening without the implicit or explicit support of the Kremlin. We know that. And so, just think about what that means for you if you're a small business in this country, right? How is a rural healthcare system in North Dakota supposed to compete against Russia or North Korea? Right. If that, I think, is the policy stance that we take as a country, we're condemning our private sector to an arms race that they simply cannot win. So, there's certainly things that need to be done. I think the public sector and the government needs to be more cooperative and work hand in hand with these entities, because they're victims. At the end of the day, these are victims, right? They didn't want to be hacked. They could have done things better, but it's certainly through no fault of their own or intentional. So there needs to be more cooperation. I think the Biden administration is making some inroads in that regard. But it all comes back to incentives, right? And these attackers are rational economic agents, and they're going to look at what is the potential gain, what is the profit to be had here, and what is the probability that I'm able to get away with it, right? And that's the expected value of engaging in a ransomware attack. And crypto touches on both aspects of that equation, right? Because it's a lot easier to move $100 million worth of Bitcoin than it is to move $100 million in cash. And crypto pseudonymity makes it easier to get away with it. And so, Ari's right that the blockchain is completely transparent, but you're only known by your public address, an alphanumeric string of characters. It doesn't do law enforcement any good if they see, yes, this address is holding $50 million worth of Bitcoin from a ransomware attack, but you don't know the identity of that person and you can't get to them. They're probably overseas, they're in Russia. So, as long as cryptocurrency is legal and widely circulating, we need firms like TRM Labs and Ari doing the great work that they're doing, and other blockchain analytics companies, right? Because we need, this level of sophistication and good guys working on this. But I wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed in the wake of the Colonial Pipeline attack, and I just called out very clearly that ransomware as it's currently conducted wouldn't be possible without cryptocurrency. And so when you look at the economic implications, you look at the national security implications, as I know we're going to get to, cryptocurrency is used to bypass sanctions. Those are very clear and a calculable cost on society, and we have to ask ourselves, what are the commensurate benefits that we're getting? And frankly, I think the benefits are quite small. There really hasn't been that killer use case yet. And an area would point to, yes, there's other countries where could benefit. That's fine, but from the U.S. standpoint, I think the costs outweigh the benefits. And so, I said we should ban crypto. You can imagine how many friends that made me, but I guess I find myself in good company with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger there. But I don't think that's obviously realistic. I don't think it's going to happen politically. It is possible. A lot of people say, well, there's, it's technically not possible. China did it, so we know that it is possible. But I think absent a ban, we need to tighten crypto regulation, and I think that starts with the on and off ramps where crypto's converted to fiat and vice versa. And right now, crypto spot markets aren't regulated in the US because crypto is considered a commodity in most cases, and commodity spot markets or cash markets aren't regulated at the federal level. So there's things we can do in the US to restrict crypto's use, but it's only going to be useful to the extent that we can collaborate internationally. And we know Russia is just simply not going to play ball. And we've seen, OFAC sanction already a couple of cryptocurrency exchanges, all based or tied to Russia. And I'm sure we're going to start to see more, sanctions hit these exchanges and crypto actors in Russia. But it's a weak point, and I think we're going to see crypto only grow in prominence as a way to bypass these sanctions going forward.
That's great. And Ari, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but also it's an opportunity to talk a little bit about Russia, because Ari, you spent a lot of time in Treasury, and I know you're very familiar with some of the actions that the United States and Europe are starting to take right now in terms of responding to the incursion in Ukraine with sanctions. One thing that we are seeing in the news these days as well. We live in a different world now, and the world of cryptocurrency and digital currencies. And there's a possibility that sanctions might not have the heft or effect that they used to in the past, because there might be other things that Russian entities can do, whether that's using hacking techniques or ransomware to steal digital currencies, whether it's advancing their digital ruble, their own sort of central bank currency, in the hopes of trading it directly with other countries without converting it into dollars and so forth. So I want you to respond to Lee, but I also want to get your thoughts on what we're seeing right now in real time going on in Ukraine, and how the debate we're having right now impacts these potential sanctions.
Yeah, no, it's extraordinary questions, and it really is an extraordinary moment. I think for the last year, 2 years, we've seen the sort of national security space, the world really move to a digital battlefield. And while we're seeing sort of a kinetic war play out now in Europe for the first time in generations, it started as a cyber war, right? I mean, there were cyber attacks that started this weeks ago, and I've been spent the last couple of days thinking about sort of how crypto plays a role here and how we can help mitigate the risk, working with folks like Jessica and FBI and global law enforcement. I would say this, and I think Lee raised some good points. I think what you've seen, ironically, and maybe not ironically, over the last 6 or 8 months, is that we've seen the U.S. law enforcement, OFAC, for example, already start to go after the types of targets that we're going to see them continue to go after, and that is sort of like the illicit underbelly of the honestly overall growing and illicit crypto economy. So Lee mentioned SUEX, for example, right? SUEX was a what we call a parasite VASP, a parasite virtual asset service provider that was basically sitting on the infrastructure of a larger compliant exchange and without any compliance controls in place, and moving and they were designated by OFAC for facilitating ransomware. But it could just have been as easily designated for facilitating sanctions evasion or other types of illicit activity. So I think we've seen a two-pronged approach right now from the administration that's likely going to continue in the cyberspace. And that's been the one, working with private sector to harden cyber defenses, but then two, really start to go after aggressively illicit actors in the cryptocurrency space who are facilitating this type of malign activity. Another example, we've seen the Department of Justice indict 2 what we call darknet mixing services. And a mixer is basically an on-chain cryptocurrency exchange where you put in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, it mixes it around with others and sends it out clean the other side. That is not a crime. There are reasons that people want to sort of keep transactions, private on an entirely open ledger. But what is a crime, what DOJ has said is a crime, in fact, it's money laundering conspiracy, is to conspire with a darknet market like Alpha Bay in order to advertise as a money launderer or advertise to launder the proceeds of illicit activity. So I mentioned those examples because there is an illicit underbelly. There's no doubt of the sort of larger crypto economy, but we've already seen the targeting of those types of those entities. And just to kind of finish off on this, look, our entire sanctions regime, and I spent, a couple years, at Treasury thinking about these things, is predicated on the hegemony of the US dollar. If you cut off a foreign bank from correspondent banking, which we saw yesterday, and a couple of days before, it's a death sentence. That remains true today. The overwhelming majority of financial transactions in the world occur in US dollars or have some connection to the US financial system. There may be a future state where transactions can occur, on the blockchain in cryptocurrency, essentially bypassing the US financial system. But as we sit here today, the overwhelming majority of transactions occur in US dollars, and banks need correspondent banking accounts in order to do those transactions. So I think that I understand that there is a future state, and we're going to need to be very, very diligently focused on sanctions evasion from Russia over the course of the next, rest of our lifetime, maybe, given what's about to happen there with what I think is going to be Iran-style sanctions. We're going to have to focus on those things. But right now, I'm not sure we necessarily live in a world where there's a real risk of being able to entirely obviate U.S. sanctions because using cryptocurrency.
Right. Shane, just to jump in real quick, Ari's right. There might not be an immediate risk, but certainly this could lead to an acceleration of crypto's usage as a medium of exchange or as a settlement mechanism for central banks and international banks to avoid these sanctions. One of the things that we're talking about, today in the wake of the sanctions announcement yesterday is, why didn't we ban Russian banks from accessing the SWIFT interbank messaging service? And not to get too far into the details of what is SWIFT, but it's a communications protocol that allows banks to communicate with one another. It's not a settlement layer itself. And there's many reasons why that we didn't do that. And during his press conference, President Biden said that our European allies weren't quite ready to go there. There's a very real possibility that if we deny Russian banks access to SWIFT, that means that gas supplies get shut off because they can't pay for them, or European banks can't get paid from their Russian counterparts. But I think one of the reasons, the unstated reasons, is that they worry that this would accelerate the usage of cryptocurrency. And so I think this is something that is really going to undermine our national security when we're relying so heavily on sanctions. It's really the only game in town right now to punish. Obviously, it didn't have a deterrent effect. And so if we're hoping on sanctions to change the calculus in Putin's mind, cryptocurrency isn't going to help.
Yeah, I want to bring Jessica into the conversation in 1 minute, but Ari, while we're on the topic, I do want to ask, since you've mentioned some of the measures taken by Treasury and DOJ. Lee makes a good point. There is this fear that we may be entering into a new world. Maybe we're sort of doing the test case right now. And the next time something like this happens, we may be needing to place a lot more worry on the fact that there might be some one-to-one exchanges between Russia, China, Iran, and being able to bypass the U.S. dollar. And Treasury seems to be worried about that as well. There's been some conversations about developing a digital asset here, right? And I was but more generally, I wanted to get your thoughts on sort of what steps are being taken. I'm going to talk to Jessica about the DOJ side in particular, but the steps that we've been seeing by Treasury more recently. You mentioned some of the OFAC designations that have happened, and we've also seen Treasury, sort of go out front and provide, they've got a compliance manual, right, for folks to try to take the sanctions more seriously. Things like using geolocation tools to block IP addresses, things like that. So those who are watching may not be that familiar with all of these measures and what exactly Treasury and other agencies have been doing to regulate the flow of cryptocurrency for illicit means. Some folks may think it's completely unregulated. So how exactly, how do you feel about the measures that have been taken? Are they enough? And how do they compare with other currencies?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And just sort of jumping off point, you mentioned a couple things. Pro tip, to folks in the audience, read this stuff. You can learn more, in my mind, from reading what you just described as, essentially OFAC guidance. I think it was really more of a brochure, talking about sort of prior FAQs, different guidance, enforcement actions. But this thing is an incredible, helpful resource to understand sort of like how OFAC, the sanctions regulator for the US and really the world, is thinking about how cryptocurrency exchanges should take a risk-based approach to sanctions compliance. Highly recommend. Another thing to read are enforcement actions. FinCEN, the SEC, and others are, putting out enforcement actions, which to me are actually even more helpful than guidance, because you know what's coming next. If you're doing these things, stop doing them, right? I think that's a really, really helpful resource and something to sort of look at. And the other thing, and Jessica, I'll let her sort of handle this, but the other things are read indictments and statement of facts, in court proceedings. It is way more helpful to understand sort of how prosecutors and law enforcement and regulators are thinking about these topics, reading these things, than necessarily sort of the Google crypto news feed that, we also get every morning, to our inboxes. So I would just say, definitely take a look at those things. But one thing to sort of hammer home is that in the United States, and this is different in the world, to Lee's point, cryptocurrency businesses are highly regulated by FinCEN. If you are a cryptocurrency business, I see those eyebrows going up. Stop it, Lee. All right. So cryptocurrency businesses, cryptocurrency exchanges, brokers, custodians are money service businesses for purposes of FinCEN, which means that you have to have a modern risk-based compliance program, which requires trained compliance professionals, policies and procedures. It requires transaction monitoring in cryptocurrency, like what we do at TRM. It requires that you file SARs, suspicious activity reports, that Lee mentioned earlier. It essentially requires that you act like a financial institution when it comes to your AML program. This is not true globally, and I totally recognize that. And I think it's really incumbent upon the Financial Action Task Force and global regulators to coordinate globally, because crypto does not stop at the U.S. border. But I would say, sort of like, I think one misconception, a myth around crypto is that it's somehow the Wild West in the United States. It is not that. Cryptocurrency businesses like Coinbase and FTX and Binance and others that operate in the United States are regulated by FinCEN. I was on a panel, 6 or 8 months ago, and I still have PTSD from it, because I said, I talked about unregulated exchanges, and I got about 3 texts in a row. One was from a friend at FinCEN, one from OFAC, and one at the White House, who said, stop using that term. Every cryptocurrency exchange is regulated. They may not be compliant, but they're regulated. So now I use non-compliant exchange to describe that. But it is really, I think, an important point to note that cryptocurrency in the United States is a regulated industry. And there are things we could do better. I think we'll eventually see a clear regulatory framework for crypto, maybe, legal framework from the Hill and elsewhere, but it is a regulated industry.
So I want to come back to Lee's eyebrows in a moment, but first I want to turn to Jessica and talk about the DOJ and FBI perspective, because this has been mentioned a few times now that it looks like we've seen some good news, right, over the last year or so, right? We've seen the FBI be able to trace and claw back some crypto from some major ransomware attacks, the Colonial Pipeline incident, for example. We saw a whole of government approach that was very successful against REvil. And we've seen just these, continued success stories. And I'm wondering, sort of how representative they are, right? The ones that actually do make the news, where the FBI is actually succeeding in clawing back some of those assets. But also, I wanted to get your perspective on what else needs to be done. We're seeing a lot of action at DOJ and FBI. There's new task forces, as Ari mentioned. The FBI now has a virtual asset exploitation unit, I believe it's called. DOJ has put up a team, a cryptocurrency enforcement team that's hard at work. So a lot of action. I just want to know sort of, how much of this is bearing fruit and how representative are these success stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had absolutely some big wins this year over the past 12 months. We've had wins though for the past few years. Oftentimes though, he just doesn't necessarily get the press or publicity. That is fine. Like I said, it's certainly we're not out for the publicity or anything like that, but we do want to encourage, at least to the general public, that the FBI and DOJ are out in the space and that we are taking, some sizable measures and working with our intelligence community partners and then also our foreign law enforcement partners in disrupting this activity. Certainly, there are some major challenges when it comes to this. When Lee mentioned just the amount that's of ransomware that's basically coming back to Russia. I mean, there's significant challenges there. Obviously, we have no extradition treaty in place with Russia, so we can identify cyber actors all day long that are responsible for this ransomware activity. The problem is, though, is that, what's our enforcement at that point in time? Certainly we can do what we call, DOJ name and shame, in which you indict, you put them on a, wanted poster, and that's an effective tool, but that's just one tool. And we know that, that's only, one piece to what we can be doing in this space. You highlighted obviously some of our successes, with Colonial and trying to, get the ransom payments back. And that's certainly something that we will continue to look at, anytime that we can. Like I said, if we have visibility into infrastructure, if we have visibility into wallets where we're able to, turn those transactions around, we'll certainly do that. Like I said, and again, in coordination with many of our partners. It may not be the FBI that has the lead on that. It could be something where it's coming from one of our other partners that we would rely, or kind of work alongside for them. Because ultimately in this space, you talked a lot about the different task forces that are in there. This isn't just the FBI, this isn't just DOJ, this isn't just, Cyber Command or our foreign partners. This is all of us doing it. Nobody's looking for the medal to say this was our case or, or anything like that. This is the whole of government, whole of world effort and really trying to be successful in this space, because as everyone's highlighted, it is incredibly complex. Our cyber actors are very sophisticated in what that they do, and we will take any means that we can on trying to disrupt their activities. When it comes to even, if we don't have access to, say, some of the actors, we will take other steps. For example, just a year ago, we were successful in disrupting the Emotet malware. And Emotet was responsible for dropping credential harvesting malware. It was responsible for dropping ransomware. And so at that point in time, we were able to, like I said, take some, offensive operations in terms of actually just disrupting their entire infrastructure. And again, working alongside, 8 different countries to do that. We will do that time and time again. Like I said, if other steps aren't successful in trying to actually apprehend some of the subjects behind it. So unequivocally, that's what we'll do. In terms of just kind of even the task force model and where we are in that space, the FBI has been much more strategic over the past few years in taking a look at our investigations. So the way oftentimes people might say, I'm here in Raleigh, and if all of a sudden there's a company that gets infected with a specific type of malware or ransomware, we may not be the owning office of that, because what we don't want to have happen is that if there's a new victim in our AOR or area of responsibility, we don't want it now so that my squad is starting an investigation into a new ransomware variant. We want it so that way that intelligence and that kind of that knowledge set is strategically located where, wherever that might be, but there's one team that's really focused in on it. So what may happen is that, a company may be infected here with a ransomware variant, and I might have to call over to our St. Louis office that might be the expert in that variant to say, okay, what do you know about this? Let's get you in touch with that specific victim, and let's be much more effective and strategic in going after this type of malware. And we see the same thing on the criminal side and national security side and how that we target it. We'll work alongside our DOJ partners, time and time again. And as you mentioned, they have the ransomware task force that they've stood up to make sure that we're really being as effective as we can in putting all the priorities to these type of investigations. After Colonial, our director Ray, said that, ransomware is our 9/11 today. And this is where that it's going, where that it is impacting critical infrastructure at such a, tremendous rate that we really have to push all the resources that we can on this threat to ensure that we're effective in it. And again, it just goes back to whole of government efforts to be successful.
So Shane, I just add kind of one thing to that. Jessica highlighted, I think, so many important points, but I think one to step back from a moment is just like the very best agents on earth are working, for U.S. law enforcement right now in these cases, and the expertise is really extraordinary. And something that I've seen, I think there's this sort of TV, born reality that there's all these turf wars and these agencies are not getting along. My experience as a prosecutor was that you would be able to put together teams of folks like Jessica, who are true subject matter experts in their space, with folks from IRSCI like Chris Jencheski, and folks from at DOJ. You'd have the truly leading prosecutors on these cases like Jessica Peck and Alden Pelker, and these people who are true subject matter experts, from regulators like Michelle Corver at FinCEN and folks at OFAC. And you'd be able to really reach across the interagency to put together these types of teams. And it's great to see that FBI and DOJ are sort of professionalizing this or putting process behind it. But this has been going on for a long time. And the threat is very, very real. I think we all acknowledge that. But I would also say that it's also important to point out sort of the work that's being done on the other side to stop it. And it's incredible and it's heroic. And when you see these cases, actually happen, the largest seizure in U.S. history, that doesn't happen on a day in New York City, right? It happens over the course of 4 or 5 years of great police work. And we have great sophisticated tools like TRM and others, but really at the end of the day, it's great agents who are not only using those tools, but using everything that they have in their toolbox, search warrants and subpoenas and legal process and knock and talks and working with foreign partners, seizing servers all over, the world. It's there's all of these things come together to build great cases. And we do focus a lot on the risks, and they're very real, but it's great to focus on the response as well.
If I could just highlight real quick that we would not be successful in this space if we don't have victims coming forward and talking to us. So we are able to see through our collection platforms a portion of the activity that's happening. And so if we don't have victims that come to us and tell us about, like I said, whether that's malware, whether that's ransomware, whatever that it might be, whatever type of cyber event that, you're kind of in the middle of, if you don't come forward, then we can't go and investigate it. And so really trying to highlight that victims coming forward, and then also having those relationships with our private sector partners. Because again, with many of our successful operations, it's not just law enforcement that's cooperating in this. It is law enforcement, it's private sector partners that have a role in this. And again, unless we get to the point of, having that cooperation in place, then we won't be successful. So just really excited. I can't encourage it enough that trying to, establish a relationship with law enforcement and with the Department of Justice, and trying to demystify a lot of the myths that when you call the FBI, that all of a sudden we're showing up with Suburbans and raid jackets, and that's just not the case. I mean, if you'd like a good show, we're happy to do those type of things, but that just doesn't happen. Or the notion that when you call the FBI, that now you're going to have to testify in front of the grand jury, and you're all of a sudden now going to be, your name is going to be on the headlines of the New York Times tomorrow. Again, those things just don't happen. And so trying to get to know your law enforcement representative in your area, your DOJ representative, things like that will go a long way in trying to work towards a collective, end to all of this.
That's great. Now, I want to come back to the whole of government comment, but first, since you mentioned victims, and I know the FBI has been doing a wonderful job of outreach and trying to communicate that message to victims, making them more comfortable about collaborating. I want to ask you a more specific question that I think can sometimes get controversial, and that's on victim payments. To the extent you're able to answer it, people have different views on this, on whether or not we can effectively, whether we should prevent victims from paying the ransom, whether we can. And I know the U.S. government has traditionally discouraged people from paying the ransom. But time and time again, we see that particularly in these sort of double ransomware attacks, as you mentioned, particularly if there's sensitive data that might be released out into the world, people are very quick to act and go ahead and pay. Can you just talk a little bit about how that's developing and what the FBI is doing in that regard?
So, the FBI stance, and I don't see us ever getting away from this, is to not pay the ransom. But there's a big but after that. So, don't pay the ransom. You're going to continue to, create this ecosystem. This will, it will still thrive the more and more money that we put into this. And the cyber actors will know that there's just a tremendous payout at the end of the day. And there's a big but, and however, we are not in your shoes. So like I said, we are not in the shoes of the executives that say that information is so sensitive that we have to, pay for it and get it back. Doesn't mean that the FBI leaves. It doesn't mean that we're no longer going to work with you and cooperate with you and help you in any way that we can. Like I said, it's just one of those where we will always say, just don't pay it. And the other concern to it too is that we find that victims that do pay, they're often targeted again because you're now known as a victim that's willing to pay. We've seen it before where that oftentimes you may not have the best remediation or incident response after the fact. And so the actors are just still in your network. And so 6 months later, or however many months or weeks later, you might get hit again with the same ransomware variant. And even though that you're willing to pay, it doesn't necessarily mean that your systems will be decrypted. We've seen lots of issues with actually trying to decrypt the systems. And also just that you pay, it doesn't mean now that that data won't, walk. You've given, unfortunately the data, you've given it, but the cyber actors have stolen information from your networks. And there's no guarantee that they're not selling it or doing something else to it now that they have possession of it. So again, just concerns all around in payment. However, again, we are not in your shoes. So if that, at the end of the day, that's the steps that you need to take, then certainly, like I said, that's a business decision and it's not like the FBI won't continue to assist.
Ari, what's your perspective on this now that you have clients in those shoes?
Quite frankly, it's exactly as Jessica explained. I think we're entirely aligned there. I think we'll continue to see a posture, and it's the right posture, where we should encourage businesses not to make the payment, but also really understanding the reality of what it means to a business to be, to have its data lost, and sort of not ultimately forbid it. I'm not entirely like this. These are issues we think about all the time, and I think my views are still evolving here for sure. But I don't know that there's a world where OFAC should ultimately ban ransom payments or sanction ransom payments, or law enforcement make it a crime to make these payments. So I think I'm very much aligned with sort of the current view on this and the way Jessica articulated it.
Right. Lee, did you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I mean, from a policy standpoint, think of it from a game theory perspective, right? I just don't think it's a credible commitment, right, to say, well, we're just going to ban ransomware payments, because as long as there's, one or a handful of victims that are willing to pay, then that whole, that commitment breaks down, right? And especially when crypto is easy to acquire and transmit, it will break down. One of the things that surprised me in the wake of my Wall Street Journal op-ed that I referenced was, I was totally expecting the crypto supporters to let me have it. But I heard from a lot of small businesses that, had either, been victimized by ransomware and had to pay or lost everything. And they were, thankful to finally have a voice, because for every colonial or of small businesses, healthcare providers, municipalities throughout this country that are victimized, and it never ends up, on the front page of the New York Times, and no one is really speaking up for these companies. So this is, I say that there's two pandemics. There's the coronavirus, but then there's also the ransomware pandemic that's absolutely decimating so many businesses in this country.
Yeah. So Jessica, I did want to come back to you on some of your comments about the sort of whole of government approach that we're seeing in this space. A couple of things caught my eye recently. There was sort of late last year, General Nakasone, the head of Cyber Command and NSA, was made some comments, I guess in the wake of Colonial Pipeline and some attacks on critical infrastructure, that this is not necessarily just a law enforcement problem. We need to and are taking this seriously. And this is where I want to bring this sort of back to the national security space for purposes of this conference. And there were some comments made by some senior leadership of the FBI recently as well that this is yes, indictments are great, but they're not the only solution, and we need to be aware of that. And so where we need to back off, we will. And Lisa Monaco, Deputy Attorney General, has also made some comments that this is our this is our 9/11 moment, right? Just like in fighting the threat of terrorism, indictments are not going to be enough. We need to disrupt, right? So I want to talk about that balance between sort of indictments and disruption, and the balance also between the role of law enforcement and the FBI and Cyber Command. How are we seeing that shift? How are you seeing that shift from where you sit? Is it a helpful development? Is it changing FBI priorities? Because we all know that you're doing God's work and there are not enough of you. There are not enough prosecutors to bring these cases. Priorities have to be made. So I'm wondering, as we see Cyber Command, and other actors in the USG start to take a more prominent role in the disruption part of this, is that helpful? Or where should we see all this going?
Yes, so absolutely helpful because, what we always say, so we have to leverage our own unique authorities and capabilities in this space. And that's kind of key to all of it. So the authorities and capabilities that I have are different than NSA, that's different than US Cyber Command. And unequivocally, it really is whole of government efforts in trying to do this. And you're exactly right that, indictments may not be the answer to all of this. And for us in the FBI, working these investigations, we realize that, and the win might be leveraging one of our other, partners to be, conducting some type of activity in this space. So unequivocally, like I said, that's where that we need to go. I can tell you that, the partnership has never been stronger with, like I said, our intel community partners and trying to determine kind of what's the best next steps on trying to handle some of these cases. And it may be, like I said, handing over information that we have over to, like I said, to US Cyber Command or to some other entity, and for them to leverage those capabilities in this space. So, like I said, it's absolutely where that we need to be. There's certainly some things that we have to work along with because, for their perspective, some type of cyber operation, they may not have the same concerns as, discovery and kind of eventually if we're going to bring a case to court, kind of what that looks like. And that's something that's constantly changing. We work with DOJ on, again, on a regular basis to ensure that, our focus and then kind of at the end of the day, if it is prosecution, that we're still kind of running a case the way that we need to be. But if it means, like I said, that at the end of the day that that they utilize their authorities in this space and that's the best option for us kind of as a whole, then we'll absolutely leverage that.
That's great. So I'm seeing we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to leave time for a chat with our area about basketball. But before we do that, I want to go around and this feeds off of a student question, actually. Somebody asked about, there's an executive order that is expected, I guess, any moment now with regard to cryptocurrency. The expectation, I think, is that the White House is going to ask the relevant agencies to basically come up with their own plans and on how we can better regulate in this space. But I wanted to start with you, Ari, on that question, but I want to frame it in a broader way, which is that, what else is needed? If we look at the fruits of an executive order like that, what would you like to see in this space?
It's a great question. And yeah, we're anticipating this executive order, although given the state of affairs in the world, I don't know if this is the sort of priority for the administration at the moment. I think we were supposed to see it this week. And right. I think it may be a little time now before we see it, but you never know. I think it's going to be just what you described. But I think what it is, the idea here is that we have a bunch of regulators who are all thinking sort of separately about how to regulate in the crypto space. You've seen FinCEN, as I kind of mentioned earlier, really provide, I think, significant guidance and advisories around crypto. You've seen the SEC regulate mostly by enforcement action. Quite honestly, you've seen the Fed publish a paper on central bank digital currencies. You've seen the president's working group come out with a paper on stable coins. I think what the request is going to be here is like, hey, we need to all put our heads together and come up with a clear regulatory framework in the space. Right now, what we do still see in a lot of places is, compliance officers at cryptocurrency businesses and financial institutions essentially skating to where the puck is headed. And I think that the idea of this type of executive order would be to say, hey, we would like to see the entire interagency come together and ultimately provide a clear regulatory framework that I'm hopeful will result in a clear legal framework in sort of the form of some kind of legislation around this. And it's going to have all of it in there that I just mentioned, plus, to much of what Lee said, sort of how do we address some of these issues around ransomware and cyber, money laundering. But I think it's going to be sort of the idea is to get to something more comprehensive. I'm not entirely sure it's going to be much different than things that we've seen come out of the individual agencies, but I anticipate the executive order will actually be a lot less important than what we see 6 months from now. And that is essentially the fruits of the agency providing whatever they were asked to provide around this the order.
Right. Lee, what would you like to see?
Well, I think I agree with Ari's assessment. I mean, what I would like to see is a national strategy. And this is something that, both crypto supporters and skeptics like me have been calling for. What is the US government's approach and philosophy when it comes to cryptocurrency? And so what I would like to see the executive order lead off with is a statement that, the US dollar's role as the world's reserve currency has provided all of us tremendous benefits. And it's also allowed us to use the US financial system as an instrument of foreign policy. And that the policy of the US government is to not do anything deliberately that would undermine the dollar status, our financial system status. And I think if you approach it from that perspective, it's going to lead you to be a little more skeptical of cryptocurrency. But the impact of the order will be, I think, limited because by and large these are independent regulatory agencies, right? The CFTC, the SEC, the Federal Reserve. These are independent agencies. So I think meaningful change is going to have to come, from Congress. And we've seen both the chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler, and the chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Rostin Benham, call on Congress to address some of these clear regulatory gaps in cryptocurrency. The most striking is that cryptocurrency exchanges aren't, Ari says they're regulated, I'll say supervised at the federal level, right? And no one would suggest it's a good idea for the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ to be unsupervised, but that's exactly the state of affairs we have when it comes to these cryptocurrency exchanges. Yes, they have to register with FinCEN. Yes, they have to have file SARs. Yes, they have to have an anti-money laundering and compliance sanction program. And if they don't, they better call TRM Labs real quick because, I think you're going to see FinCEN, in the wake of these sanctions announcements on Russia, really ramp up enforcement actions. But that needs to be paired with someone who's going in day to day, like I used to do at the Federal Reserve as a large bank examiner. I was on site every day at these institutions, right? We need that level of posture at these cryptocurrency exchanges.
Great. Unfortunately, we have a hard cutoff, so I'm going to have to end it with that. But there was a plug for